What may owners do with their property? What may owners do with their property? In this section, we analyze some traditional restrictions on property rights. We postpone discussing modern government regulations such as the zoning ordinances till the final section of the chapter. Bequests and inheritances, circumvention costs, and depletion costs. In a feudal or tribal world, uh, law typically stipulates the heirs to land rather than the owner choosing heirs. To illustrate, the eldest son inherited all of his father's land in medieval England. And in matrilineal tribes, the land is often inherited by the niece from her aunt. Superscript 44, it reads, in most of England from 1066, the date of the Norman conquest, until 1925, the general rule for disposing of real estate on one's death was that it passed intact to the uh, decedent's eldest son, a system called uh, primogeniture. Testators were not free to alter this rule except under very narrow circumstances. Back to the text. Uh, Furthermore, feudal and tribal societies typically restrict the sale of land. As law modernizes, owners increase their power to stipulate the terms of inheritance and sales. The law in Western countries has evolved over centuries toward more freedom for the owner to specify who may have the property after his or her death and what they may do with it. We discussed briefly the economic analysis of this trend. Any restriction on the owner's choices creates an incentive to circumvent it. To illustrate, imagine an owner who wants to bequeath her land to a particular friend, and imagine that the law will award the property to someone else. The owner can circumvent the law and say, by transferring title to the friend today and leasing it back for $1 per year until her death. Circumventing the law usually requires the assistance of a good lawyer. In general, owners use costly legal resources to circumvent restrictions on the use of property. Now change the example and imagine that tight laws and costly lawyers prevent the owner from circumventing restrictions on bequests. Because her desire to designate her heir was frustrated, the owner may deplete her property before she dies. For example, she might cut timber prematurely or exhaust the soil's fertility by intensive farming, or postpone needed improvements to buildings. In general, rules that restrict transfer undermine the owner's incentive to maximize the value of the property. Circumvention costs and depletion costs provide two reasons for allowing an owner freedom in transferring property at death. However, these same reasons justify restricting the freedom of an owner in special circumstances. Most property rights live forever, but all owners die. Sometimes one generation of owners wants to limit the discretionary power of subsequent owners. To illustrate, suppose that I own my family's ancestral home, Black Acre, and I stipulate in my will that no one will ever use Black Acre for purposes other than a residence. Subsequently, I die, and my heirs want to develop Black Acre into a golf course. Should the law enforce the restrictions in my will, or set it aside and allow my heir to build a golf course? If the law routinely sets aside such restrictions, then I have an incentive to deplete the resource or circumvent the law prior to my death. If the law enforces such restrictions, then my wishes may be fulfilled, but at the social cost of making it difficult, if not impossible, to move Blackacre to a higher valued use than its use as a residence. In the preceding example, the owner apparently wants to restrict future uses of Blackacre for his own perfectly legitimate reasons. In other examples, an owner creates a trust called a spendthrift trust to protect someone from his or her own bad judgment, or a bequest attempts to keep property in the family forever, or a restrictive covenant attempts uh, to channel future sales to certain classes of buyers. Superscript 45, 46, and 47. And they read Superscript 45. For example, the trust is created in which the beneficiary receives the interest income from the trust property but cannot touch the capital until she is middle aged. Superscript 46. For example, the owner leaves instructions that at his death, his land is to be given to his oldest son, at whose death the land is to be given to his eldest son, and so on. Superscript 47. In the past, in America, covenants sometimes blocked future sales to buyers belonging to certain races. Back to the text. In general, the principle that the current owner should be free to structure transactions as he or she wishes runs up against a difficulty when the owner wants to restrict future owners. In these cases, a conflict exists between the freedom of consequential owners of the same property. Any reduction in the freedom of any owner in the sequence may cause economic waste, regardless of whether the reduction in freedom comes from law or a private transaction. English common law responded to these facts generally by being skeptical of restraints on alienation, as they are called, and specifically in the case of bequest by a complicated law called the rule against perpetuities. The rule imposes a time limit on property restrictions imposed by the terms of a gift, sale, bequest, or other transaction. Instead of lasting in perpetuity, restrictions automatically lapse when a legal time limit expires. The legal time limit has the curious formulation lives in being plus 21 years. To illustrate its meaning, assume that my only child is an unmarried daughter, and I stipulate in my will that she will inherit my ancestral home, Blackacre, on the condition that it never be used as except as a residence. According to the rule, the restriction must ordinarily lapse 21 years after my father's death. Superscript 48, which reads, this account of the rule against perpetuities is rough, but not exactly correct. The life in being designated as the measuring life does not have to be that of the daughter. It could, for example, be the first child born of Kinshasa, the month before the testator's death. The rule, to be brief, is extremely complicated, so complicated that it invites creativity to avoid it.